And I'm Chris Yeh. Great to be here, Julien, on a fine Friday afternoon for me, which makes it a Saturday morning for you, I believe.
It is, although I always forget that it's Saturday because I work 7 days a week, or work, whatever. I don't know if it counts as work when you're doing it every day.
Once upon a time, people could tell what day of the week they were on by the television schedule of the networks and
Right.
what days the shows were on. And Saturday was the day that they would put The Love Boat and Fantasy Island on. But nowadays, since everything is streaming, we have no idea what the day of the week is.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's also, yeah, I don't know. I think it's it definitely gone harder. It's also the remote stuff. Like that makes it harder. Okay, let's dive into this, Chris. So the question I had um, is really like, how should I think about, I put it in the title, fronting on people, but kind of like trying to impress others and like
Hmm.
prove to others that I'm better than they are. And part of the reason I want to discuss this is one, something you said when we spoke last week, which was about, when you like there are people who try to like make it hard to spend a lot of time with them, which is a way of fronting on others, right? And there are people, and that's something you don't do, and you had a thesis on why you don't do that.
Hmm.
That's kind of like what to think about this. I kind of posted on my new Twitter about this angle is I was listening to this really, really old talk that our common friend Ben Kasnoka did with Reid Hoffman, and about their book, The Startup of You. And there's a really important concept in that, which is like being in permanent beta. And you're kind of, always learning and always trying to improve. And I was talking to my wife about this, and I was thinking like, most people are actually kind of like in permanent alpha, meaning A, they're not trying to learn, and B, they're always trying to prove to everybody that they're better. Um, and like that's definitely not how I go about things, but like that's something that people do, and that they're like, I know a lot of people are much more mindful about that, and
Hmm.
people are more successful than me, so there might be something I'm doing wrong. So that's kind of where I'm coming at this from, and maybe I'll let you kick off with some initial comments.
Absolutely. And I'm pleased I've maintained my record of not reviewing the questions in advance. Although I will point out that if you're a listener and you want to get those questions in advance before even I get them, even though I never read them, then you can sign up for a Patreon, which I believe is at patreon.com/blitzscaling. Is that right?
It is, and also so we're almost in September, so we're going to have our quarterly community get together in October, so in a little bit over a month from now. So people join now. We actually had a Patreon person join last week who gets to join this quarterly thing pretty much immediately. So it's a good time to join.
Fantastic. So let's talk about fronting, which is a term that I hadn't thought about a lot since the late, great Coolio used it in his famous song Gangster's Paradise, where he talks about people fronting. And of course, it's a term that, in my mind, conjures up images of a bygone era, fronting as well as its cousin, keeping it real. But when I think about fronting, I think that the key becomes okay, there is actually a kernel of real motivation, of a good reason to front, which is that you do want people to know what you're good at. You do want people to respect what you do and what you're capable of. And sometimes people, because of their aversion to fronting, will self deprecate to the point where other people are unaware of what they can do. And that may seem like it's modest, but it's actually just the other side of fronting. Because the real problem with fronting or self-deprecation or anything else is not that you are excessively proud or bragging or something like that. It really boils down to, are you accurately conveying information about yourself? If the information you're conveying is accurate, of course, there are different ways to convey that information, different intonations, different sort of flavors to how you convey it. But at the end of the day, conveying that information is what you need to do in order for people to know, hey, you're good at this, you have these interests. Therefore, let me talk about these things that I'm good at or I'm interested in. And that actually makes for a more effective collaboration. So the problem is not sharing what you're good at. The problem is trying to create an image that is inaccurate. And I believe that as long as you first and foremost create an impression that's accurate, then after that, we can work on the niceties of how to do so in a way that seems more appealing to the people you're talking with.
I assume there's another component to this, which is making interactions low friction, right? So I'll just pull in this question that we have, and maybe we can answer it. Just like, should CEOs say they are CEOs? I assume startup CEOs, which comes from Franklin. So thank you, Franklin. Guys, if you want to ask a question, just put it in the comments. But that's like, in a way, right? Like, let's say if I'm pitching a customer and I'm the CEO, well, it's useful information for the customer to know that.
Correct.
And in a way, I'm kind of like fronting on them, like, hey, don't kind of like treat me like an SDR, treat me like the CEO of a successful, company. On the other hand, I'm being lower friction to interact with by giving people the information they need to interact with me. Like, how much does that come into play?
So I think that if you're a CEO, you should tell people you're a CEO. And that is information that it is both true and relevant. And therefore, you should try to convey that. But the question is, how do you convey that? If you convey that by saying, I'm a big baller CEO, I'm killing it and crushing it all the time, well, that's also introducing friction because people are going to think you're an asshole. If, on the other hand, people say, well, what do you do? It's like, well, I'm the CEO of a company that does this. And if you don't say, I'm the CEO of a company that does this, haven't you heard of it? Right? There's a big difference. And it boils down to, are you conveying information or are you trying to elicit a particular kind of emotional reaction from the person on the other side? If the emotional reaction you're trying to elicit is, I want this person to be impressed and say, whoa, why are you? But it's only relevant if. And so when you convey the fact that you're a CEO, the goal should not be to impress the other person. The goal should be for them to understand that you have decision-making capacity for a particular company and that they should be thinking about how they can interact with you to further their ends as well as yours.
So, part of the equation here, the hard thing is to be self-aware and like actually know what your intentions are, and I would like to discuss that. But let's look at something, and I found this question from Franklin really interesting. So let's look at something like very specific. So I'm starting a new business, all right, and on my LinkedIn, I could put, and this is what I've done in the past, founder and CEO, or co-founder and CEO, or whatever. And there are certain upsides to doing that, right? So one upside is if I connect with somebody or someone looks me up, they're like, oh, this guy's the founder and CEO of a company. The downside is that, maybe internally I'm communicating the wrong things to the team, which is like, hey, we care about titles and I'm better than you. It's like, look, everyone knows I'm the founder CEO of this business internally. Why am I going about bragging about it? Or at least it can be perceived in that fashion. How would you use the framework you're laying out in this specific case?
Well, let's cover the internal use case where, because I think it's pretty obvious externally why you should say you're a founder CEO. It's accurate and it gets them to behave in the right way. Internally, when you say you're a founder CEO on your LinkedIn, you can simply explain that. You could say, look, as the founder and CEO, I'm the primary outside face of the company. It's important that the people I speak with know that I speak for the company. Internally, of course, it doesn't really matter. We work together the way we always have. But externally, that is the role I need to play in order for us to have the greatest chance of success. And if that's actually true, then people will accept it. If you're the kind of person who just does it because you like to feel high and mighty, well, the people will recognize that as well.
Yeah, so this is an interesting case, right? Because what, like, here I am not trying to, like, I'm not doing it to feel great about myself.
Right.
Although many people could, um, but I'm just not. But still, it's unclear what to do, and it's unclear what is the right thing to communicate so as to make interactions as easy as possible across the board. So I'll introduce an additional factor, which is that if you look at my past experiences on LinkedIn, I was founder and CEO of a company, of 2 companies, and you can see that. And then, so people might assume, like, if I use something like learning and building, a big swath of people, company, just by looking at my past experiences, and that's a small startup. So it's like, hey, this guy was founder and CEO of other startups. He's learning and building a new startup. Presumably, he's founder and CEO of this new startup. So many people would understand. Others would not. Being more explicit would make it kind of like easier to engage with.
Yeah.
And then there's kind of like the downside internally of being like more status and kind of like title conscious. So how would you navigate that landscape?
Well, I would just go ahead and use the title founder and CEO. I think when people say things like learning and building, it's getting too cute. I mean, why make people do extra work? Just tell them what you're doing. You're the founder and CEO. And there's a big difference between saying, hey, I'm the founder and CEO of this company, and saying, I'm the founder and CEO of this company, right? It's all in the intonation, it's all in the way you deliver it. And if you're concerned that you're the kind of egotist where if you deliver it wrong, then people might take it the wrong way, then okay, maybe you should consider adopting. Convey the most accurate message. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, so it's kind of like you want to be as explicit as possible in most situations and convey the accurate information. You do want to be mindful of how others will perceive it,
Yeah.
but you also want to be mindful of whether others will understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And being
Now,
explicit definitely helps with that.
and boils down to self-awareness and understanding, what your own tendencies are. I have some friends who are wild egomaniacs, love being the center of attention, and always, always, always portray themselves in the best possible light, in the biggest possible light. I happen to find it amusing. I don't really care. And I know who they are, so it doesn't matter to me. But that's not an approach that I would adopt. If you had figured out for yourself that you were incapable of conveying things accurately, if you were pathologically driven to puff yourself up, then you might try to adopt the underplaying strategy so that you wouldn't be tempted to do what you know would come naturally to you. But that's a question of a very specific set of circumstances, a very specific kind of personality. For most people, again, just convey the most accurate, most complete picture that you could do in a concise way. And don't worry about the other perception. The perception is going to be built by how you deliver it, and then more importantly, what you follow up with. You say you're the founder, CEO, and you have a conversation. You say you want to work together. Do you actually follow up with them or not? That's going to matter more than whether or not you said you were founder, CEO, or whether you were a learner and builder.
So I want to extract from this and highlight, a benefit of not fronting on people and not being obnoxious all the time, which is that it actually enables you to be explicit about the things that others should respect you for, without coming off wrong. So let's say, Chris, if you say, hey, I'm a venture capital investor, I founded my own fund, and I wrote like one of the top business books of the last decade, you can say that in a matter-of-fact manner,
Yes.
and that impresses people just based on the facts. If you were obnoxious and you said the exact same thing, you couldn't say that. People would interpret it as being obnoxious instead of being factual. So there's kind of like a benefit to being non-obnoxious, which is that
Right.
enables you to actually, be more explicit about why people should treat you with deference.
Yes. The irony is that fronting makes it harder for you to actually get credit for your accomplishments. People, whether or not you've actually accomplished it, don't want to give you credit if you front on them all the time. So fronting, let's define fronting not as conveying to people the achievements you have, but rather conveying to people the achievements you've had in your life and your capabilities in an obnoxious and unappealing way.
Okay, so one of the things that happens, and it's interesting. I think I've come across less situations like this the more senior I guess, maybe,
Hmm.
or it's like the more senior I get, or the more kind of accomplished the people I engage with are, the less I come across situations where I feel the kind of like emotional need to front on people. And I think that's actually not so much about me, but about them. So when I'm dealing with people who are less accomplished, they tend to go the way to like pretend that they're better and like puff themselves up. While if I'm dealing with people who actually are accomplished, they you don't feel the need to do that. So I'll give an example, and this example I'll use it to promote an upcoming interview that we have with one of my very good friends, David Kenny, who is the CEO of Nielsen. So Nielsen's now private, but they were, before going private, a Fortune 500 company. David is, a very, very top tier person. And he never, like, if when I engage with him, he's not trying to prove to me that he's better than me. But, let's say I'm in Chiang Mai right now, and,
Hmm.
I do engage with people here who are not of his caliber, let's say, and they do try to front on you about whatever it is that they're really proud about. It's like, oh, I founded this crypto startup, I don't know. And there's a kind of like reaction, like an emotional reaction that I have to that. I think now, like I have a lot less, but when I was younger or maybe less accomplished myself, I don't know, like you kind of like feel the need to react to that and be like, you know what I mean? Like I don't know, like
Yeah.
how I guess the question is, when you're like, it's easy for me to not front on people when I'm dealing with you, when I'm dealing with, let's say Ben, as an investor, when I'm dealing with David, because we're all on the same page. But like when you're more junior or younger or dealing with less accomplished people, they're acting in this manner that just like makes it emotionally difficult to be, mature about it. And how do you handle that?
Front on me, and I could demolish them by I would have gotten somebody who is, not that accomplished to be impressed by me, but also dislike me. And first of all, the fact that they're impressed by my list of accomplishments is irrelevant. If they can't help me, why would I bother? And moreover, if they dislike me, who knows whom they know or whom they might speak with, who might say, hey, there was that guy, Julien, or that guy, Chris, who was a jerk to me. So there's no upside other than the momentary emotional satisfaction of putting someone in their place. But there is no long-term benefit to doing it. There's only downside. And so you just choose not to do it. And you just have to, laugh a little internally and say, it's funny that this person is trying to puff themselves up and it's amusing. I see through it and it doesn't change the way I see this person. But, if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. It's not up to me to poke their bubble and try to take them down. Now, it would be different if, let's say, this person were running for president of the United States. Then it's clear consequences that could ensue. It is important to say that this person is an incompetent moron or what have you. But in most of our everyday lives, if somebody chooses to front, then we just, in our mind, say, okay, that's probably a person I don't want to spend as much time with. But there's no reason to call them out on it because there's only downside.
So what's the right reaction? Like, is it to go along and seem impressed, or how do you
As one of
how
these
do you engage?
fronters, yeah, role play.
Okay, so how do you know if you are fronting on people, right? Like, how do you measure your own internal, clock, or your own internal sense of what you're doing? Like, how should it feel, and what feels wrong?
Yeah. So the feeling that I look for, and again, I don't know if it's the only thing that people can look for, but the feeling that I look for is, am I looking at these people and eagerly seeing if they're impressed, right? The desire to impress is the hint that you might be fronting. Like becoming too eager to impress is the source of fronting. And so if you're looking at someone and talking with them and you've conveyed information about yourself, it's very reasonable to see, okay, what's their reaction? Are they interested? But if you have a need for them to feel impressed, then that shows you that you've gotten caught up in the emotion as opposed to just trying to convey the information.
And it's like, as opposed to what? Like, what is a need you should have? And my best guess, and maybe I'm wrong, is the need you should have is to be maximally high ROI,
Yes.
meaning create as much value for them, and extract as much value for yourself, which is mostly learning, as possible from the interaction.
In conversations with folks, and I will talk to them about, they'll ask me who I am and what I'm doing. And Reid Hoffman, our most famous book, the ideas of that book. And that is, I think, a way of conveying accurately some of the accomplishments I have and some of the reasons why they might want to be interested, but without going over the top. Like going over the top would be, you know, yeah, I'm really well known as a best-selling author, and my book Blitzscaling is one of the most important books of the past decade. I'm sure you've heard of it. And I wrote with my dear friend Reid Hoffman. Of course, you know him as the founding board member of PayPal, the first investor in Facebook, the founder of LinkedIn, and probably the world's smartest billionaire, along with Warren Buffett. And I also have a firm, Blitzscaling Ventures. We're going to kill it. We're going to just deliver amazing returns because we're using the ideas of my genius books to figure out which companies to invest in. I didn't really convey any additional information with that. I just sought some sort of validation by impressing people, which is ultimately not very useful and, in fact, counterproductive to the things that are actually valuable.
Okay, here's a situation, and I want to get your take on what I should have done.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just right before this live stream, I was talking to a guy that I might be doing some work with. And, we had a very productive conversation, and then he wanted to talk. We set up a time to touch base again on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're Friday, talking on Monday, and he proposed a time, and I wasn't available at that time because I was doing a live stream with a partner at Y Combinator who just put out a book and reached out to us because he wants to be on our podcast. Okay. So it is accurate for me to say, hey, I'm not available at that time because, I could give the reason. And A, it's accurate. B, it's somewhat useful in the sense it's like, hey, obviously I can't reschedule this.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's kind of fronting on this person to be like, oh, right. Yeah, I'm a co-host of the Blitzscaling podcast, and partners at Y Combinator reach out to me, and I'm therefore like so much better.
Right. And therefore, I would love to talk with you then, but I have someone more important to talk with at that point. So that is, I agree, a tricky situation. Here's how I would handle it. So if that person proposed the time, what I would tell them is, I'm really sorry. I've already made a commitment to interview someone for my podcast at that time. And given that it's Friday, it's Saturday or Friday, and it's just coming up on Monday, it's really too late to reschedule it. I really need to keep that commitment, but I'm happy to make myself available to you at a different time. And if the person said, oh, well, who are you recording it with? Like, oh, that's the interesting part. It's a partner at Y Combinator. He has a book out. He wanted to come on the podcast. And now it's not you fronting, it's you helpfully providing clarification.
Right.
So you notice what I did is I focused not on who's more important, who's less important, but on the principle of I made a commitment. It's really late in the day to change that commitment. I would love to change that commitment for you, but I can't because I made a commitment.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, and I think the answer, like if I think about it now, is you can know what the right answer is just by measuring your motivation. So if your motivation is to find a good time to connect, that's what you would say. If your motivation is like prove this person you're better than them, then you'd like go off on a bunch of not necessarily the most important information to the process, but important for you to front on them.
Exactly. And by the way, someday we'll all be dead and history will judge us. So what will all the point of that fronting be at that point in time?
Okay. So there are ways to engineer conversations so that you are able to impress people.
Yes.
Right. So for example, a lot of examples, but an obvious example would be to, let's say if I ask you for an introduction to somebody, that's in a way, like if I ask you for an introduction to a venture capital investor, in a way I am engineering the situation so that they have respect for me, because it's like, hey, look, one, Chris is a respected venture capital investor. Two, Chris is associated very closely with Reid Hoffman, who is arguably the top person in your field. And three, I host the Blitzscaling podcast, and you know all that just through this introduction. And I've engineered this so that you know that. And I didn't do that like by accident. I did that on purpose so that you would treat me with deference, right?
Or not treat with deference, but at least, be predisposed to saying yes or engaging. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why for many, many years, I've given the advice to people who are trying to break into an industry or build up their brand to have a blog or a podcast or something like that, because everyone loves to feel important. And the fact that you're reaching out to them and speaking to them makes it more likely they're going to want to do it, because who doesn't want to hear someone who admires them ask them questions about why they're so awesome? And this reveals something important, which is implicit in what you already said about asking for an introduction. which is that the easiest way to convey some of your awesomeness is to have someone else do it. Because then you don't run into the issue of, oh, I'm bragging. And in fact, one of the things that I strongly believe in at various social events, like if I go to some sort of social event, meeting of important people or what have you, and I haven't spoken at that event. So if I speak at the event, then of course I naturally have a status and people will come to see me and everything like that. And so I don't even need to worry about it. But let's say I'm just there in my capacity as an attendee as opposed to the featured player. Well, how do I make myself useful? Well, one of the things I will do is I'm meeting people. If I introduce other people, I will say, I will introduce them. And sometimes the person will start talking about themselves. And I'll say, Lena is not doing a good job of really conveying how awesome she is. So let me try. And I'll say, here's why this person is so awesome. They've done this. They've done this. This is something they've accomplished. This is a person they've helped. And they're too humble to tell you about all that. Acting as the wingman, the introducer, is something that really helps that person that you're introducing out, but also reflects well on you. Because who is the kind of as well.
So what's like the question is like, what's the difference slash where, like, it's a spectrum, right? And like, where in the spectrum do you want to fall? There's so many examples like that. Like the introduction example's an obvious one, but it's like the way you dress, right? Like there's just a lot of things in how you like that you can engineer so as to get certain reactions to people. So it's like, why, like, is it obnoxious for me to dress in a certain way so as to get a certain reaction? Isn't obnoxious to get some type of introduction so as to get a certain reaction? Like, when does it become fronting versus like making the interaction low friction by conveying the relevant information?
So here's what I would say. It all depends on the consistency of that approach. Because if you do it inconsistently, just instrumentally in order to impress people, then you are fronting. If you make it a personal trademark, then you're not. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So Paul Feig is a Hollywood director. He's the creator of various television shows and movies, like the very famous but canceled Freaks and Geeks. He worked with Judd Apatow on various comedies. He's the director of Bridesmaids. That's probably what he's best known for. But his personal trademark is, unlike most directors who wander around in jeans and a t-shirt with a baseball cap, wherever he goes, he's dressed in an elegant suit. Now, if he just dressed in an elegant suit for a particular party, then you're like, oh, who are you trying to impress, Paul? But if he always dresses in an elegant suit, then that's just what he likes. It's what he enjoys. It's part of who he is. I have a couple of other friends that I've spent time with in the past few days. I have one friend who always dresses very informally. He wears, basically, instead of regular pants, pajama pants. They're extremely colorful and hard to miss. But he does this all the time, not just when we go to a public event, but just in his everyday life. He doesn't do it because it is some carefully calculated thing for this particular event. He just does it because that's how he lives. Or there's another guy who I met who's an entrepreneur who always dresses in all white. And he always stands out. Now, again, if it were just to stand out at a single party, I would be like, what's up with this guy? But I've seen him 4 or 5 times. He's always dressed all in white. That's just what he wears. And so it becomes a bit of a personal trademark. Now, the opposite of that is a friend and classmate of mine from when I was at Stanford, who would only ever wear glasses in class. Now, that is a classic example of fronting. It's, hey, I'm going to wear these glasses because it makes me look intellectual, even though I never wear them at any other time. That, to me, is fronting. That, to me, is deception. But if you are always that way, if you're consistent, then you're not deceiving. You're still conveying accurate information about yourself.
So it's kind of like knowing who you are and communicating to people who you are consistently, because that's who you are and you want people to know who you are. And if they don't like who you are, then they should know that so they don't engage with you. If they like who you are, they should know that so that they can engage with you. But you're not trying to deceive them to thinking you're somehow not the person that you actually
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. Or for example, I think people know me for being very friendly and very warm. You would say that's probably true, right, Julien?
I'd say you're one of the most helpful, friendly, warm, easy to deal with people I've ever met.
Now, the key is I do that pretty much for everyone. I don't say, oh, well, you're a billionaire, therefore you get the real treatment and everyone else gets the cold treatment. I just try to be friendly and helpful to as many people as possible. Now, there are limits. If I'm on the street and there is a mentally ill homeless person, I will not necessarily engage because I believe at that point that my personal safety is in danger. And so I'm not going to do that. But in general, like for example, we were at this very fancy party at a billionaire's house in Los Angeles somewhere. And I chatted quite a bit as well, in addition to the attendees and our billionaire hosts, who are wonderful people, by the way. I also chatted with the folks who were tending bar. And one of them was a gentleman who actually turns out is very interesting, does a lot of work for the family. And, in his spare time, like every fall, he goes gold prospecting for a couple of months in the wilderness. That's really fascinating. And one of the people that they had working on it was a guy who is a psychology graduate student. And turns out he's a big fan of one of my other friends who does the psychology podcast, Scott Barry Kaufman. And so I'm friendly and warm to the people who are attending the bar, as well as to the wealthy people who are in attendance. And the fact that I do that indicates, hey, this is who this person really is, as opposed to this is a person who's going to act differently around the super wealthy versus around the help.
That's interesting. So, like, it's kind of if you find yourself often wanting to portray yourself as being different than you actually are, what you should do is just change how you actually are.
Absolutely.
So it's like
Because if who you are is no good, then change it. You don't have to accept being a jerk. You can figure out how to be a good person and act that way, even if it's not natural at first.
right, yeah. So it's kind of like I've found or something I've worked on in the last couple of years that you've helped me with partially is being less disagreeable. And what I needed to do was not necessarily. Well, and the other one, which was actually adjacent to this, is like swearing less. And um, like the background I had, or the where I'd worked in the
We're
past,
in
it,
politics. There's a lot
yeah,
of swearing in politics.
a lot of just like swearing and being disagreeable is just like an acceptable thing to do. And now
Yeah.
that I'm in, like enterprise startups, that's not appropriate. And what I need to do is not to like pretend that I'm more agreeable and not swear when I'm talking to VCs, let's say. What I need to do is just not swear in general and be more agreeable in general in my life. And it's not that being disagreeable is bad or swearing is bad. It's that it's not appropriate for my goals. Therefore, I need to change myself fully, not pretend that I'm a way that I'm not.
Exactly. And again, I think it's great if people change for the better. I mean, that's a wonderful statement about you and humanity. And if people can change, then that gives us all hope that we can make the world better. So I think that's all to the good. And again, I think that, in the time we spent together, I think that you're telling me you've changed. I will definitely accept that. I've always liked you, regardless of whether you were swearing or disagreeable. But, I liked you enough and had enough of a relationship to provide feedback. And that is also a sign of a strong relationship, because if we didn't have a strong relationship, I wouldn't provide that feedback because I would judge that you wouldn't listen to it and that would damage the relationship.
Okay, so another component of engineering things is how much time you give people and how you kind of like frame interactions,
Mhm.
right? So an easy one that we discussed last week is, well, if I do phone calls with people and I'm like, look, I'm scheduling this for 30 minutes because that's all the time I'm going to give to people because I'm really busy. That does convey something to people. And if it's like, well, if I convey the opposite, it's like, hey, I'm always available and always happy to answer, and I answer emails immediately, and I'll spend a lot of time with you, that conveys something else. And, to what extent, like, should you being like try to convey the accurate thing, right? So like right now I actually do have time to spend with people, right? So that is accurate. Like, it's not like I only have 30 minutes to spend with people,
But it's your choice. It's your choice as to how much time you want to spend with them. Right. And you, again, the fact that you have time available doesn't mean you're obligated to spend it. Just like if you had wealth or money didn't mean you'd be obligated to give it away. It's your personal choice.
Right. So if I say, okay, I would have more time to speak to this person, but I'm going to only spend 30 minutes generally with people. And part of the reason why I would do that is that it changes how people engage with me. So there's a scarcity of available time. Then they'll treat the time that they have with me differently. And is that inappropriate? Like, am I?
No, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you are consistent and transparent about it. So what you would tell people is, listen, let's schedule 30 minutes. If we need more time, we can always find another time. But there's a lot of folks I want to talk with, a lot of things I want to do, and I also want to be efficient with your time. So let's just start with 30 minutes and take it from there. And that's a consistent thing. Now, again, if it's different, if you're like, well, after talking to you, I can tell that I only want to schedule 30 minutes. An hour would be too much. I would get tired of talking with you. Well, obviously, that's not going to go over very well. So you've got to be consistent about it. And then it's okay to have a half hour time and tell them, this is going so well, I really want to keep talking. Nobody's going to object to that.
But if I was to engineer this so as to get the reaction that I want, right? So let's say, let's say the guys who help us with our podcast, right? I'm like, look, I feel that they should treat me with more deference. Therefore, I am going to be, unnaturally constrained in the amount of time and attention I give to them, so that they have to clamor more. And I could do that.
Yeah, but what would that accomplish? What would that do?
Right. Well, that's my point. I mean, what it would do is that it would change my relationship with them. And is that a form of fronting on people? I guess it is.
I just feel like it's an inefficient way to do it. If you say, I want to change my relationship with people, then you should tell them, hey, I would like our relationship to be like this. Instead, you're taking this indirect route of creating an artificial constraint in order to convey an impression. I'm like, why not just tell them?
So I think the overall perspective, or the overall prescription here, is don't invest too much time into conveying an impression. Instead, if convey reality in a manner that's as succinct as possible. And if you don't like the impression that reality gives, then change the reality.
Exactly.
So if I want people to treat my time with more respect because I don't have much, then maybe I should be setting things up in a manner where I have more going on, so that they kind of have to do that. If that's so let's say David Kenny, right? With David Kenny, I know, he's a Fortune 500 CEO, right? So it's if he gives me 45 minutes of his time, that's just worth a lot, right?
Yeah.
It's just he only has 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week, and he has thousands of people who want to talk to him, and that's just worth a lot. And if I want people to treat my time in that way, I should change the facts about what I could do with my time.
Right. Or, as I said, you could also just apply something consistently to all and say, look, here are the reasons why I'm doing it. And this is something that applies to everyone. And that's pretty straightforward. And again, I know people who are like that. So, for example, somebody like Adam Grant, very famous professor who I know, is very good about saying, hey, look, I get 350 speaking inquiries a week, and I'm probably not going to be able to say yes to whatever it is you're sending me. If you want to send it to me anyways, send it, but I cannot promise a response. And if there's no response, the answer is no.
Right. So what I've recently done, and I think I ended up doing I think I did the right thing, and I want you to confirm it. So I used to have my calendar set up so that my default calendar events were, I think, 50 minutes or 45 minutes, something longer. And now I've made them shorter to 30 minutes because I'm starting to get more busy, and I just don't want to give people as much time because I want to do more. Right.
I think that's perfect. I think that's exactly the right thing to do. And you just say, look, there's a lot to get done, and I want to respect your time as well. You're busy. Your time is valuable. I think we can get this done in 30 minutes.
So I kind of reset my default for everybody to be less.
Yeah.
And that's okay because that just reflects I'm doing it consistently. I'm not doing it to I'm not let's say I'm talking to Ben next week. I'm not like, oh, Ben, you're a VC and I want to front on you because I'm a founder and some weird psychology thing going on here.
Yes.
I'm just trying to schedule 30-minute meetings with people so I can get through more because I have more to do.
Exactly. And again, I think it boils down to, when in doubt, go with reality. Reality is usually the best approach to take because it's the thing that's true. It's the thing that's not going to cause people to go back later and say, hey, wait, you said this and you didn't do this. No, it's like, look, this is the way it is. I think, I can't remember who I was speaking with. I said, oh, I'm not a very complicated guy. And they said, no, actually, you are a pretty complicated guy. I'm like, you're right. There is a lot of complexity in my life. How about this? I'm a very straightforward guy. And what I tell you is basically what I think. And that is, I think, an approach that works well in life, and it saves time.
I just Googled this Mark Twain quote. The quote is pretty much what you said. When in doubt, tell the truth.
Yes. When in doubt, tell the truth. It's easy to keep it straight.
Well, so the full quote from Mark Twain is, when in doubt, tell the truth. It will confound your enemies and astound your friends.
Well, he was a very wise man, even though he himself had a very, very hair trigger temper and did a lot of unwise things. But there was a lot of wisdom to him as well.
Okay, so this is super helpful, Chris, and I think it'll be helpful for me as an entrepreneur and helpful to other founders as well, or prospective founders. So thank you for your time. If you're a founder listening to this, or if you know a founder, please send the video to them so that they can get some learning from Chris, who's an infinite amount of knowledge stored in his brain. And if you want to get more of this, like this video so that YouTube gives you more recommendations. You can also subscribe. And thank you to our team who makes all this happen.
And do not forget, if you liked what you heard, you want to get the questions in advance, you want to ask your own questions, you want to be a part of the Quarterly Mastermind, go to patreon.com/blitzscaling and sign up to become a patron.
I like that word, mastermind. I'm going to use it now for our thing. All right, I'm hitting end of stream. See everyone next week.